Evening all. Over the years I've had a lot of hobbies one time or another, anything from battle reenactment through to extreme ironing. But one hobby that stayed with me over the years has been wargaming. I enjoy it a lot. I like the model making and the painting aspect. I like when you get the table out, you put the terrain on and you put your model armies there. The gaming side of it, is quite good, competitive. You try and use tactics the best way you can. And there's a little bit of luck involved, but also, particularly with the historical gaming, you learn a lot of history along the way. And it's a good social hobby as well. You'll never meet a bigger group of men over the age of 40 by the name of Dave in your life if you take up wargaming. So it's a really good hobby that I've enjoyed over the years, and it is quite a product of the Anglosphere. Wargaming's origins lie in the late Victorian era, when model or toy soldiers became available on the market and were very popular, and the collecting toy soldiers took off in the United Kingdom and also in Germany, but the two countries diverged. So on the one hand, the Germans were very much into the model making process itself, and so these beautiful models, and the Germans make some of the finest models in the world, were part of dioramas, or when the technology became available, model railways. In fact, there's a lot of places around Germany where you'll see these beautiful, intricate model railways. In Britain, we wanted to play with our model soldiers, so in the 1890s, the author H.G. Wells actually was the guy who wrote the first set of war game rules called Little Wars. And so we, in the United Kingdom, wanted to play with our models. Wargaming was kind of very niche. I think model making was the big thing until the early 60s. About 1961, a book came on the market called, I think, Battles with Miniatures, or The War Game, written by a chap called Donald Featherstone, and that kick-started the whole wargaming hobby in the early 60s in the United Kingdom. And it really took off from there, and then it kind of spread to the other English-speaking nations, became big in America, also Canada, Australia, New Zealand, to a certain extent. In Europe, there's some wargaming in Germany and Austria, although they are very sensitive about what history they depict in wargaming. Belgium as well. Belgium has one of the largest wargame shows in the world, a show called Crisis, which is held in Antwerp every year. But other than that, it's really an Anglosphere game, and it is predominantly white and male, and I think that's just because of the way British culture is. Wargame is quite nerdy. It focuses on kind of minute things. This is something that's part of our culture. If we weren't playing with toy soldiers, we'd be shaping hedges and doing a bit of topiary or beekeeping. It kind of is one of these very quirky, very British hobbies. And so when it comes to diversity and inclusion, it's not that there are active bars put up to stop people from different ethnicities or from women joining, although I think some men adopt the attitude it's like the men's club and, a woman, because there's a little bit of autism around. So it's not that there's actual bars, but it is kind of seen as blokey, and it seems kind of a very nerdy hobby, beloved by military history geeks, and so that's a very sort of Anglosphere thing. Now I say that as a backdrop because one of the publications that comes out, you can get from most high street news agents, is Wargames Soldiers Strategy. It comes out bi-monthly, and it's a pretty good magazine. The other two are Wargames Illustrated and Miniature Wargames. It's a magazine which I sometimes contribute to, so I'm very partial to Miniature Wargames and its editor, because it gives me a job, it gives me gigs. So, but this one is a good read. I'll just show you. So you've got adverts for things there. There's some, was it Norman Knights? Saxons, there you go. World War II stuff on the other page. You'll have where is it? Scenarios. There you go. Some nice model photography. Bit of history thrown in there, and sort of painting and modelling tips. So it covers a lot of ground. But they also have some opinion pieces, usually written by people who are game designers or kind of gaming veterans, giving their opinions. Now, in this current issue of Wargames Soldiers and Strategy, there's this article called Inclusion, written by Chris King. Now, he's somebody who I've not encountered before. I don't know if he's a game designer or a gamer or whatever, but I read this article and it got some alarm bells ringing, because I'm a seasoned culture war veteran, and a lot of the language in this is the language of wokeness and of political correctness in here. I say this because when we, as I said, talking about diversity and inclusion, yes, it'd be great to recruit people from different backgrounds into Wargame, but there's a caveat here, because the way it works out, people are always worried that the hobby's going to die out because it's full of very old people at the moment, and this is true. Most Wargamers are over 40, a huge amount are over 50 or 60. They're in retirement age, and who's going to take their place once they're gone? But this has always been a worry in the hobby, and how the demographics have gone is that people tend to start when they're in their teens, so about 14, 15, they'll start collecting the models. They get attracted, but they see models at shows and shops like Games Workshop will have all their fantasy and science fiction figures on display, and the kids sort of go, wow, I want to get into that. So it starts at 14, 15, and games like Warhammer 40k are really the entry-level games. There are now some World War II games and other kind of pulp-themed games that are designed to attract entry-level gamers now. Bolt Action being a popular one. And from there, they tend to play throughout their mid to late teens into university life. But after university, they start getting jobs, they start settling down, having families. And so you can't devote as much time or money to the hobby as you used to be able to. Mum and Dad's not going to pay for your Model Army collection anymore. So from 20s and 30s, the number of people in that age range drops somewhat, and then gradually into middle age, when children are slightly more grown up and they don't need Dad so often, and Dad can wangle a little bit of free time, and going on beyond that, when empty nesters and retired people, they come back to the hobby later. So there's always been a lull, but this article raises some problems for me, because I think of what it implies. I'll read you some select bits, because I think he's using the language of woke culture, and I worry about what's being implied here and where's it all going to end. So I'll just read the first paragraph, and then I'll just read. Haven't got time to read the whole thing, because this video will take over an hour. Anyway, gaming is and should be an inclusive experience. If people don't feel included, they won't get into the hobby, and the hobby dies. At the moment, the wargames industry may be booming. That is actually true. There's never been a better time to start wargaming. The amount of high quality rules and figures on the market has never been better than it is now. But the demographics require new people. If the hobby doesn't move with the times, this bubble might burst sooner than we think. In simple terms, we need to be inclusive. We need to welcome people to the hobby regardless of their race, their nationality, their gender, their beliefs, their abilities, or any other label or lifestyle choices, because, well, why wouldn't we? Now, this sets up, I think it sets up a false premise here, because the thing that prevents people from getting into the hobby is not that they come from that they're women, or they're an ethnic minority, or they have a different lifestyle. It's because there are some gamers and some gaming clubs that are very insular and autistic, and they don't like new people at all. You get these crusty old gamers who just grunt and then becoming new to the club. They particularly don't like younger gamers who require guidance. So I experienced this a bit when I was younger. Going into this, they go, "What armies are you collecting? well, I haven't started yet. I'd like to try and see. What rules do you play? Well, I don't know yet. I haven't found any rules. Will you teach me them? Will you show me how it's done? And they don't want to do that. They want, if anybody's going to come into the club who's new, they want them the finished articles, playing the rules that they play, having their own ready-made armies. They don't want to go through the process of nurturing and developing, encouraging someone. So it's not just your background, your immutable characteristics they don't like. They just don't like anybody who requires time and effort to train up. So I'm going to start with where I think, well, okay, here's where I think he starts going a little bit off. If you want to depress yourself, the quickest of internet searches for the word wargaming alongside any form of exclusion in its ism or phobia form, sexism, racism, or homophobia, for example, will generate a dispiriting selection of blog posts and forum topics that descend rapidly into the kind of bigoted nastiness that's enough to make you feel ashamed for even reading it. Okay, my issue with this is that he's obviously put into a search engine wargaming and an ism or a phobia, right? Most people don't do this. Okay, he's fishing for trouble here. And of course, he go to these blog posts and forums, and he's going to find examples that he thinks are racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, or whatever. And yes, in every forum, on any subject, anywhere, you are going to get trolls, dregs, weirdos commenting on this stuff. Does this mean that with any hobby that you judge the majority on the actions of the weirdos, the fringe? But of course you don't. But as I said, he's fishing for his arguments to be validated here. So it goes on. A place of privilege. At this point, sorry, I've got to do this in the soy boy voice because it just reads like it. At this point, please allow me to make one thing clear. I'm writing from a position of privilege. I'm a white, European, heterosexual male, and let's face it, the vast majority of wargamers, this means that on the basis of the cards life has dealt me, I've not had things too horribly difficult. Well, suffering is all relative. If you've got a disposable income that you can spend on wargaming figures, you're not doing that badly anyway. There's plenty of white European heterosexual males who don't have the money to indulge in hobbies like this. So, and also, as I said, wargaming is not a hobby that has gone all around the world, so all four corners of the globe. It's very, very niche. So, and then he goes on, I should make another thing clear too. It's 2019, current year. And this article should in no way be written. Well, why did you write it then? Okay, so from time to time, it's still really disappointing to hear or read about people within the hobby getting exercised about real or imagined, if it's an imagined issue, is it real? Okay, of representation on the tabletop. Why shouldn't I showcase my sexualized female miniatures? No wargamer has ever said. He strawmans a great deal in this article. They cry. Really, do they cry there? What's wrong with my vignette of cannibals dancing around a bubbling pot of missionaries? It's political correctness gone mad! So all the tropes are coming out here, aren't they? Speaking of tropes, the missionaries in the cooking pot being surrounded by cannibals is a kind of light-hearted trope on the kind of Victorian Edwardian exploration. Where missionaries would go out, and some did end up in the hands of cannibals, but they wouldn't have been put in a pot because these tribes would not have had access to that amount of iron in the first place. But it's meant to be a light-hearted trope. Now, I've never seen a vignette of cannibals dancing around missionaries in a pot. I've not seen a miniature for that. I don't doubt that one has been produced at some point, but it's not as common as you think. And it's a vignette. It's not the crux of a war game. If that is being included in a war game, then it's probably going to be a skirmish game based on the pulp themes. It's going down Ryder Haggard, Sanders of the River kind of territory. It's not being a strictly historical game. You wouldn't see that in a kind of, say Sudanese war or the Relief of Khartoum war game. You just wouldn't see it in the serious historical. It's going to crop up in a more light-hearted pulp skirmish game. But it's not even offensive, they cry. I've had these minis for years and no one's ever complained before. Well, fair enough. Who can possibly be offended by it anyway? It's not like it didn't happen. These things really happened in history, There's evidence. Again, he's referring to this vignette of the cannibals and the missionaries in the pot. No, that's not history. That's a trope. That's it. So that's kind of false. He's distorting things there. And so, but then he goes on. So did the Malmedy massacre. Well. Yeah, that's different. The reason why that's different is that's not even wargaming. Nobody I know has ever wargamed the Malmedy massacre, because what that was is it happened in the Battle of the Bulge, and the SS rounded up a group of American POWs and just machine gunned them. Okay, they just machine gunned a bunch of unarmed prisoners, and nobody would wargame that, right? Because there's no competition, and I've never even seen a diorama of that. So, so he says, so did tortures, rapes, ethnic cleansing. Nobody wargames this, right? So where's he getting the idea that this and linking it to like a light-hearted trope? It's a false equivalence, and he's strawmanning as usual. So let's go on. So he goes on from that, and then he says, let's talk about sex. If I take my young daughters with me to a wargame show, I can be in no doubt that a significant proportion of any female representation they will see on the tables, and I'm just discussing the tabletop, will be at best denigrating and at worst utterly unpleasant. It's 2019, current year again. Women should be represented positively on the tabletop, and not because they're women, but simply because they're people. Right. Should be represented positively on the tabletop. Again, the vast majority of war games are going to be historical in nature, and the vast majority of battles fought in history are between armies of men. So where are we going to see representations of women in wargaming? Well, they're going to be in the kind of, as I said, the pulp of more light-hearted skirmish games, science fiction games, fantasy games. And what if the women characters are the baddies? What if they're, the White Witch? What if they're representation of Cersei from Game of Thrones, eh? Positive? Is it? I don't know. Right. Some of the ways in which it's generally not okay to represent women include, but aren't really limited to, the following. As victims. Well, define victims. Okay. He puts out all these things that we shouldn't do, but he never really gives very convincing examples. He doesn't give examples here. Victims. Okay, return to the pulp style of gaming. There's a number of games set in, say, Edwardian times or 1920s, 1930s. And I know some model companies have that figure of the damsel in distress tied to a railway track by a sinister top hat wearing villain. Okay, she is a victim, but in the context of that kind of game, in that kind of setting, it's something that you would expect to see, because that is something that they used to put into the stories and the movies of those times. Likewise, if you have women who characters in these pulp games set in past times, and they're the prisoners, and the objective of the game is for the heroic characters to come in and rescue the women folk, or even civilians. I think that's fair enough, because context and setting, you perhaps wouldn't use that, have women as victims in perhaps every game that you play. More modern ones, pulp games, will probably have the women rescue as part of the rescuers, for example. So setting and context matters here. As bimbos or eye candy, well, yeah, there are a lot of figures where women's anatomies, clearly the model maker has been influenced by the artwork of Boris Vallejo. So there is a wide spectrum of figures available, particularly women figures, and you will have like the more serious boiler-suited Ripley types, or the kind of no-nonsense female characters, and you'll have bimbos at the other, or kind of rather pneumatic figures of women at the other end. And I would say, it's all sorts. It depends on a gaming again. If you have a villain, a gangster, 'cause there are some gangster themed games. So you have the gangster and you have the gangster's mole. That's a trope. Anyway. Infantilized, sexualized, infantilized, and sexualized. Okay, I can agree with them on that one. I don't want to see anything sexualized and infantilized. But at the same time, one of my favorite game companies produces a range of figures based around the Centrinian schoolgirls. Okay, so because that's a game for a game called 7TV, which is trying to do on tabletop skirmish gaming films of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, trying to recreate action films of that era. And they did a kind of Centrinians cast, and they're supposed to go up against kind of gangsters and alien invasions or whatever. But they wield hockey sticks. They can throw explosive netballs and things like that in it. But there are, in some ways, it doesn't feel like a sexualized version of the game. There's a cat meowing out there. Let me just deal with it. Door's cat, not my problem. Right, so as a society, as a hobby, we are getting better incrementally. Obvious positive examples include the excellent output from Annie at Bad Squiddo Games. Yeah, Bad Squiddo Games, fine. They're catering for one type. They produce figures and they cater for one type of the gaming industry, and other companies do other things. Some have as I said, Boris Vallejo inspired barbarian females. But then again, the male figures are kind of all bare-chested and it's as I said, it's all about context. What game are you trying to do, and what are you trying to replicate on the tabletop? Pulp gaming. If you're doing a game based on Barbarella, you want a figure that looks like Barbarella, for goodness sake. Right. Anyway, our vocally affronted friends, citation needed here, of course, may still splutter into their ale. See, beer drinking men, problem. Okay. Sexy as out there, I suppose this means I can't have my Greek heroes being all muscular and shirtless anymore. He's straw manning so much. Quick, someone sculpt Leonidas in a dressing gown. No wargamer ever said. That's not the point. Of course that's not the point. But there's just no excuse for sculpting that US female cop figure with all her well-known features. What US cop figure? Right, so anyway, let's go on to what he talks about race next. Okay. One other thing he says about women is that the trouble is more complex than this. It's not just a matter of trying to represent women for women. We need to represent women for men. Sounds a bit Gillette advert here. Young males getting into the hobby are the ones who really need to see the positive shift of female presence in the hobby. Why? It's... they're going to get a positive influence of women just in their lives, from their mothers, from their friends, their sisters, the people they interact with. The whole thing about a war game is it's just so devoid from reality. If you have a look at some of those skirmish figures in, say, 28mm size, 156 scale, everything looks cartoonish. The men look cartoonish. The women look cartoonish. It's just... the men are kind of... You have a look at Warhammer 40k figures, Space Marine figures. That is a wholly unrealistic representation of masculinity. But nobody says, oh, I wish I was like a Space Marine. Oh, I feel so inadequate because I'm not like a Space Marine. Anyway, on to race. Race and national identity. So he goes on about, in the past, some racial physical features were over-exaggerated. So he cites World War II Japanese sculpts, with the glasses and the buck teeth. But you don't see that anymore. I haven't seen that. I don't think I've ever seen that, actually. But they tell me they used to be like that. Interesting, this doesn't seem to manifest itself quite so often with ancient period gaming, where all it seems is a little bit more cut and dried. Numidian troops or Mongol horsemen seem to be fairly uncontroversial in their on-table representation. Yes, most ancient gamers love having African troops, Numidians or Mongols or kind of non-white armies on the tabletop. It's extremely well represented. So he's kind of defeated his own argument there. Yes, we do have good representation of non-European troops in ancient wargaming, and it extends into other wargaming areas. Ancients, by the way, is the most popular historical wargaming period. I should add. So, post-colonial and post-emancipation guilt can still be powerfully provocative to say. Everything in this article just makes, it's not that he's making a general call for more diversity inclusion. Everything, it comes straight out of one of those diversity inclusion training seminars. This reads like it should be an episode of Now This, or what's the Francesca Ramsey show, MTV Decoded. It just reads like it. Post-colonial, post-emancipation guilt can still be powerfully provocative today, and with good reason. These concerns and doubts should be harnessed and discussed. Not really, they're being hashed out, over and over again. The thing is, when people get to a gaming table, they just want to game. They don't want to say, "Oh, what's the morality of this?" In fact, there are in the hobby some real sort of moralistic prudes. I've done wargaming shows where I've run a game. I ran a game set in the Vietnam War, and we had a lot of actual artifacts from the Vietnam War. We had real American helmets, Vietnamese helmets, some replica weapons, the webbing, the kit. We had all this kind of laid out on the table. We had a Vietnam War game, and we had a couple of really self-righteous people come up to us and go, "Oh, I don't think it's right to war game a period where the combatants are still alive. Wargaming shouldn't be within living memory." And then they just walk off. They don't want to get into a debate. And then another guy said, "Why do you own military equipment from an army you're not entitled to join?" Just, yeah, some people get really on their hobby horse, and that's what we got here. We are here to game and have fun, not to sit down and beat ourselves up for the sins of our ancestors. Okay, if, for example, you're comfortable modelling a vignette, there he goes again, he's always picking on the vignettes, of a slave auction from North Africa in the 1700s, but would dream of doing so for the US in the 1800s, surely the question ought to be, do I really need to model a slave auction at all? Well, it depends on the setting and the context of the game, as usual. It would be wrong and disingenuous to pretend that certain notorious and feared warriors didn't exist, but that doesn't mean their darker acts and practices should be gratuitously modelled in miniature form on the tabletop for a game. I don't see this happening, and I've been gaming for over 30 years. Please cite an example of where this has happened. We don't have to overreact and paint over all the swastikas on our Deutsche Afrika Korps vehicles. Oh no. But nor would it be in good taste to turn up to a gaming event with a beautifully rendered vignettes of their brutal pogrom in Benghazi's Jewish quarter in 1941. When did this ever happen in the wargaming world? I tell you, it hasn't. Keep it civil. Include, don't exclude. If you're going to depict, as I said, if you're going to depict something in World War II, you're always going to have one or two people going to, "Oh no, it's in living memory, it's very bad taste." Most games, if you go to wargaming shows, most of the people running the games to shows want people to participate. They're not going to be sniffy over whether you're male or female, or you're black or you're Asian. In fact, most wargames would actually welcome that. They would like more women involved in gaming, mostly because some of them are really single and they're on the pull. Anyway, simply this is less about the actual models on the table. It's worth being mindful of the language we use to describe our troops. Dismissive national epithets ought to really be avoided, in the same way as we hopefully avoid racial slurs. I take that to mean, we can't refer to the Germans as the Bosch or the Hun in a World War I or World War II game. We cannot, in a Napoleonics game, refer to the French as frogs or the British as roast beef. It's just I've never seen anybody get offended by that. This is sometimes adopting the parlance of the time. People are savvy enough not to use the most extreme language, but Bosch, Hun, Yanks, frogs, roast beef, it's very mild stuff. Same can be accentuated by rule sets assigning specific traits, buffs, What does he mean by buffs? Or disadvantages to different factions or nationalities? Yeah, some rule sets do have national characteristics for armies. I'm thinking of Napoleonic wargaming, where if you're the British, you do better if you're in line and on the defensive. If you're French, you do better if you're in column and on the attack. Other countries have something that they do particularly well. The Spanish, for example, do lots of things badly, but they're trying to reflect the real Napoleonic Wars, where the French were, the Spanish, for example, were really badly organised and led, and they suffered defeat after defeat in the Napoleonic Wars. And how do you represent that in a set of rules? If you had all the nations equally as good as each other, you wouldn't necessarily be realistic. So I don't know what he's driving at there. Anyway, I'll just get to the conclusion. He urges us to reflect and observe what we ourselves do. So yeah, typical woke warriors, trying to get us all on edge where previously we weren't on edge. So you'll have a bunch of middle-aged white men all worrying about whether they're going to offend any minorities who aren't present that evening. That's what it's going to come down to. I've known one feminist in gaming, but she was in role-playing, not wargaming. I've known a few women who wargame just occasionally, not regularly. They don't seem to have a big problem. I think it's more a case of the hobby is so overwhelmingly male and it's a little bit old. I think age puts people off more than ethnicity or gender. Maybe the question to ask oneself when planning a new provocative miniature project is not, is this politically correct enough, so much as, is this something that is reasonable and necessary, or is it maybe a bit tasteless and gratuitous? Well, considering it the Salute show this year, largest war game show in the world, somebody ran a Brexit game where Britain was collapsing and things were exploding and everything was going to rack and ruin, and you played a bunch of progressive liberals trying to escape on the last boat out of the country. And they said it was just a bit of fun. Nobody took offence. The model work on it was superb. So rather than being concerned that the PC brigade are going to moan and take offence, wouldn't it be better to craft a thrilling new characterful vignette? What's actually going on about vignettes? Hardly anybody puts a vignette. The terrain is the vignette. And then we put the armies out. That will actually make all people want to engage in the hobby and keep it alive. This isn't about this week's popular causes. It's about making our gaming community more inclusive and more welcoming. The wider community as a whole, after all, it's current year. The times are at last are changing. Yeah, thank you, David Hogg. So, again, what I worry about this is that this could be a vanguard, a kind of new puritanical movement to kind of sweep through the hobby. And as I said, if you don't want scantily clad female figures in your game, don't buy the figures. Shows are... you get a full gamut of things, but I'm just worried that a puritanical ethos is going to sweep, and it won't just stop at, is your vignette politically correct enough? It's going to go into, should you be wargaming colonial Africa? Should you be wargaming this? The Edwardian time? Should you be wargaming at all? And I know some players who only ever play fantasy wargaming, and they one or two of them have taken me to task saying, you do historical stuff, that's real people who have died, you're exploiting real people who have died. And you try and explain to them, no, that's not it at all, and you're a more bloodthirsty gamer than I am. And there's no, that's fantasy. You always got the justification. So again, I just don't think this kind of thing, I worry that it's going to be pushed down our throats. But until next time, let me know what you think in the columns below. Don't let that pull you off buying this otherwise excellent magazine. But until next time, see you later.